Hello, and this review, just like the thumbnail suggests, is for Criminal by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. So this was a deluxe hardcover edition, volume 1, I also mentioned volume 2, and it was originally a creator-owned series published by Brubaker and Phillips in the early 2000s. It was designed as a sort of meditation on classic crime themes, and every few volumes had their own separate story, and those original publications, which I haven't seen, were collected into hardcover editions by Image Comics, and I think they did that in the mid-2000s, I'm going to say. I don't have the volume with me to check. I was recently staying with some friends, and what do you do at your friends' places? Of course, you check out their bookshelves, and I helped myself to the deluxe hardcover edition. One thing I found interesting about this edition was there's a lot of extra artwork, a lot of extra essays and small insights into the writing of the comic, like you expect to see in any deluxe edition or any hardcover. There's also a mention at some point of the fact that some of the things that were available in the original comics aren't in that edition. Apparently some readers were upset by that. But Brubaker's thinking was that the original ones, because they were sort of, I don't know if they were self-funded or fan-funded, but he wanted to give something extra back to those people who originally ordered these comics when they didn't have a primary maker funding them. So, hardcovers compendium of 3 different issues. Coward, issues 1 to 5, was published originally, I think, in 2007. And in Coward, you've got a central character, Leo Patterson. He's essentially a pickpocketer. He grew up being taught to pickpocket by his father and his father's best friend, Leo. And he grew up to be known in the whole crime movement as this magnificent planner, but he's also known as a coward who runs away when the going gets tough instead of being shot down and dying. I'm not sure how that's cowardice. I feel like there's a strong element of common sense. It certainly allowed Leo to survive heists that had killed off almost everyone else involved in them, including one that's described as Salt City? Salt Lake, something involving salt. Can't remember. Anyway, the artwork in this by Sean Phillips is amazing. The artwork throughout all the criminal comics is really good. It concentrates on classic square type frames that are outlined normally in white. The coloring is good. It tends to emphasize the dark theme and the dark elements of the stories themselves, but you'll have these occasional flashes, such as when gunfire happens, you might have the entire background light out orange, or you might have these sudden flashes of white on the midst of all the action. I really like the artwork in this. It's rather classicist, and I think it suits the theme very well. The other thing that the artwork does, it will sometimes go for really, really heavy dark outlining, and that helps create the mood and the emotion in the faces that we see up close and personal inside the frame. Lots of good things there. One thing that I especially like is in action scenes, you will often get this much larger frame where you've got whole washes of background color, say the wall or the floor, and all you get is this light watercolor wash throughout. And it gives you that sense of wide open, something happening very fast moving. And the very close, very dense frames with a lot of stuff happening in them tend to be zooming in on the faces when you've got an emotion that you're trying to wring out of the character. Brilliant artwork, really enhances the storylines. Okay, so the first issue is a Coward, and I've got a feeling that the volume may be called Undertow, based on a criminal element bar that appears throughout the series. Not sure about that. So the second series within the first criminal volume is Lawless, which was originally published in issues 6 to 10. I don't know. Again, this is a 2000 2007, I think, but it might have been 2008. Here we concentrate on a character called Tracy Lawless. It's a he. He has just been released from a military prison, and we find out that while he was there in complete isolation, he didn't know what was happening on the outside, and while he was in there, his brother Ricky has died. So he leaves the prison and he leaves the army and he goes back to the criminal underworld that was his father's underworld that he never wanted to revisit, bent on finding out who killed Ricky and getting revenge. And in the course of that, we learn a lot about Tracy Lawless, we learn a lot about his family, and he learns some surprising things about his brother and maybe about himself as well. Again, great series. And the third one is The Dead and the Dying. Now, if you look online, there's some confusion about The Dead and the Dying. Some places claim that it was in volume 2. I am 99% sure that I read it in volume 1. So because it was the deluxe edition, it might be that they moved around a bit. I could be wrong. Correct me if you hold the deluxe hardcover edition in your hand and The Dead and the Dying wasn't actually in it. 99% sure though. So this was, I think, a short run. I think there were only a couple, 2, maybe 3 series in it. And it's interlocking stories set in 72. And it centers around prize fighter called Gnarly Brown. He grew up as the son of a black guy who was the second in command of this white crime boss, Hyde, in the city. And when he helped Hyde take control in the first place from the elements that were already there. And one of the promises he exacted from Hyde was that he'd take care of his son, who was then called Jake. Jake grew up with Hyde's son, equal ages, but not equal in the eyes of the world. One white, one black. One rich and the other considered not. And Jake grows up to become a prize fighter. And this story revolves around the 2 young men, their changing relationship, and how much of that has to do with a girl called Danica that helped shape them both and their relationship. Again, 99% sure that was actually in the first volume. So I really, really enjoyed the first volume. I loved every part of it. I have no criticisms. It's 5 out of 5. I kind of wish I owned it. Don't need more trade paperbacks. I've got quite a few. I can't criticize anything about the writing or the story structure. The stories have this added bonus where all the stories are interlocked. Those of us who are old enough to remember when Pulp Fiction first came out, we may remember how exciting it was to have these individual stories with the individual main characters, which then interlock as you go into the next story. The main character from the first story is a side character in there, or events that have happened in a previous narrative are part again of the background of the next one. And this is very much the case in Criminal. The only theme that really runs throughout is the bar, the undertow. That is where Leo goes when he's trying to hunt up people. That is where the guy who runs the undertow bar warns off Tracy when he comes back and indicates that he knows the entire Lawless family. This is where a young girl from an earlier story suddenly reappears as a side character that someone looks at and wonders about. That interlockedness creates a very strong virtual world. And I really enjoyed that. Again, I've already said, I think the artwork is perfect for the theme. Really enjoyed that as well. If I've got one criticism about the artwork, it's that Sean Phillips, who, by the way, is an British comic book artist who grew up fascinated by American comics, and he's worked on quite a few. I have certainly read some of his artwork before, and I feel like it might have been Hellblazer. Here in the background, you may notice on that shelf there are a number of Hellblazers. I was fully into Hellblazer for a while. And like I said, the only criticism is perhaps the females are a bit interchangeable. And this may be, no, I don't think it's intentional. It may be, in a sense, intentional, because females in the classic crime novels were very much the dame or femme fatale, and they didn't have a lot of growth, they didn't have a lot of story arc, and that's reflected to some extent in the criminals. Though I think in some of the criminal comics you get far more interactive and vibrant female characters than you maybe get in the old Dick Tracy type stories, or James Hadley Chase, for example. The images of full-face portraits of women are consistently similar. In fact, the first time I saw a full face of a female, and I think that was in the very first story arc before I'd completely fallen into the story and was non-critical. I think it was in Coward. We get a full face look at a female with the hair. It's like the classic face type shape. And I looked at it and went, oh, that's very reminiscent of a previous comic I've read. It was probably a Hellblazer, but it might have been another one. It's also strangely reminiscent of one of the Sandman comics. There's a short story in front of one of the trade paperbacks, and the face was virtually identical. I think the woman in that case was called Mary. Here I am reading a completely different Brubaker story, and the woman is virtually identical. That is the only criticism I have. It isn't a big criticism. Essentially speaking, if you're doing comics and you're doing frames, you rely on a level of repetition and image recognition on the part of the reader. So I thought that was a bit funny. Not a big one. So yes, that's a short review. I always claimed that I wasn't going to do reviews of trade paperbacks and comics until I'd mastered the editing skill to put up little images on the screen popping up like you see on more experienced YouTubers to illustrate the points I'm trying to make while talking. I still don't know how to do that. And I want to review Criminal while it's still fresh in my mind. Great collection. Great edition. If I ever happen to see it lying around and I'm on the prowl for a book, I may well buy it. I can't say I loved number 2 as much. In fact, I didn't finish number 2. So, yeah, okay, this is about volume 1, but volume 2 started with a story that seemed consistent with the criminal series in volume 1. The first story collection was Bad Night, and it centers around Jacob, who's a writer and artist of the Frank Kafka P.I. series, and I like that because the Frank Kafka P.I. appears peripherally in the previous stories in volume 1. So I feel bad not liking it, because in the introduction Brubaker talks about how this very first Bad Night story felt more personal to him and perhaps a bit more autobiographical. If there seriously is autobiographical, Ed, you have my heartfelt sympathy. I'm hoping that the autobiography element came from the fact that Jacob, the writer-artist, is insomniac. That rang a bell. I've got sleep disorders, and the way it's described in Bad Night, I think Brubaker maybe is on the same page on that one. I hope your wife didn't die in an accident in a water culvert. I hope you were never charged with her murder, but, you know, not going into that. So the first series is about this artist-writer, and he gets horny one night, gets together with this woman, and this ends up being terrible things happening to her as the crazy crackhead woman and her boyfriend hijack him and force him into doing things he doesn't want to do. I bore with the first part of the storyline, the first story. I didn't love it. Perhaps I didn't like the desperation. Perhaps it was so well written that the desperation and futility on the part of Jacob were just a little bit too harsh. But then Jacob kept doing really stupid things. If they've already done such horrible things to them, you don't then decide that they're your friends. And he kept on doing that. So stupidity in my main characters is something that I find difficult to cope with, and I get that he was lonely, and I get that the sex was really good, get it, but still. So when that first story arc ended, it was with a sigh of relief that I moved on to the second one. What I thought was the second one, but it ended up being just a continuation of the first story with the exact same character, Jacob, and the exact same crackhead woman who... And by now I wasn't having fun. And then when the third bit started and it was the same one, it's like, I'm done. There's other things to read, and anyway, I'm on holiday, there's other things to do. If I need to pick up a book for a couple of chapters in the evening before bed, it's not going to be this one anymore. So I never finished Volume 2. Sorry, I wish I'd liked it as much as Volume 1. Volume 1 was marvellous. It was all the stars, and I thoroughly recommend it. I'd be interested to hear from anyone who has this hardcover edition about whether I got it right about the third story in Volume 1. I'm pretty sure I did. And if you liked Volume 2, was Bad Night... The fact that I couldn't bond with Bad Night or the characters, was it just me, or did anyone else feel that it didn't quite zing the way Volume 1 did? If I have noticed in various artists, whether it's musical artists or visual artists or authors, sometimes they write something that's too close to their heart, and all the true brilliance in their artistry is subsumed in the personal experience, and I end up feeling bad for not liking as much the one piece of art that they really poured their heart and soul in. It's not the first time. John Butler Trio Singers, I think, was the first one. Peaches and Cream was the first song by that band that I didn't like, and this was apparently the one that the lead singer wrote about his new baby daughter and wife or whatever. So maybe that's the thing, or maybe it's just me. Maybe I just couldn't in any way really emphasize with Jacob and his extremely foolish behavior. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, do the algorithm things if you want to, but if you don't, go away and read books. I strongly recommend comics and trade paperbacks because they are awesome, but any book you enjoy, that's a good book. Thanks for watching.